that we've been learning. We've been learning chapter 15, and let me mute everyone here. So we're in the book of Shmuel Beis, Samuel 2, chapter 15, and hopefully we'll finish chapter 15 today. We've been discussing the escape of David and how David chose not to fight back with Avshalom at this point, and rather just to take off. And he's also keeps convincing some of his followers, you don't come with me, you don't come with me, you go back, stay in Jerusalem, and be a what's it called, double agent. He should basically spy for David. And David even sends back the ark with the Kohanim, with the Kohen Gadol, the other Kohen, and they tell David that Achitophel is among the conspirators with Avshalom. And maybe we'll start, actually, let's start with that verse. 31. Let's start at verse 31. Someone told David, saying, Achitophel is among the conspirators with Avshalom. And David said, please confound the advice of Achitophel, O Hashem. So David begs Hashem to make Achitophel's advice somehow foolish, sachelna, make it foolish, or make it look foolish, make it like a Metzudas Tzion says tipshus, make it look like a crazy advice. And the reason David begs Hashem that Achitophel's advice should be confounded is because Achitophel was known to have very solid advice, very strong and good advice. He was the brilliant scholar of the day. At the same time, he was not a righteous person. He was brilliant. But he does, as we'll see, and as we see here, who does Achitophel join? He joins Avshalom. And as I mentioned yesterday, and I mentioned the last time, that Achitophel was surprising that he's leaving David and joining Avshalom, especially because Solomon, Shlomo, is David's choice, who should be king next, and Achitophel is Shlomo's grandfather. So it is quite. Can you hear me? Because it says that my. Can everyone hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
It says that.
Yeah.
It says that it's surprising that Achitophel would choose to go with Avshalom, who's not his grandson. Instead, he's going with Avshalom, and instead of going with Shlomo, who is his grandson. And there is a commentary. I don't know if I mentioned this, that Achitophel was really hoping that he would become king. And the reason is because he saw kingship in his vision. He had a vision that he saw kingship from him, and he was convinced that it must be him. He's such a scholar. He felt this is a good opportunity. Why? Because he's going to join Avshalom. Avshalom will kill David. Avshalom himself somehow won't be capable, or somehow will lose the kingdom. And Achitophel was thinking of himself. And so there is such a thought that his arrogance made him make such a foolish decision to join Avshalom. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say Achitophel must know that the prophet Nathan came to David and told him the kingship will always be in his family. But he is not his family.
So, this is the thing. He might have known that. If he did know that, then what he's understanding is for some time, temporarily, it'll go to Achitophel. He thinks he'll get it temporarily. But he had a very strong desire to have this. Sometimes you push aside you choose what you want to believe. You pick and choose.
He hopes over hope.
Especially when your dreams are so you're so you have such a desire for the kingdom. So other issues don't seem to take them into consideration, because your desire it blinds you. Your haughtiness, your arrogance, it blinds you.
Sheva's father?
At least Bathsheba's father. Bathsheba's Bathsheba's, is it her father? No, grandfather. It's her grandfather.
Oh, I thought
Eliam,
grandfather to
grandfather. Yeah, so it's a great-grandfather. Great-grandfather to Shlomo. Correct. Great-grandfather to Shlomo. Okay, so this is the so David HaMelech is very nervous over here because Achitophel has such sound advice that this is a very dangerous time now. Avshalom is a danger to him. But when you have Avshalom with Achitophel, who's giving Avshalom advice, that's a recipe for doom. In other words, we are for David's doom. He's got Avshalom has a recipe for success because he's got Avshalom who has no ethics. He'll do whatever he needs to, and he has Achitophel who will give the best advice. He's got. This is the advisor. This was David's advisor. So this is a time for David to be very nervous. But what does David do? He davens to Hashem. He says, Hashem, please confound the advice of Achitophel. And then comes the next verse 32. And it says, David was approaching the summit where he would prostrate himself to Hashem. Vehine, and behold, and there before him was Hushai the Archite. So Rashi tells us that he was common for him to bow there when he would come to Yerushalayim, because he would see from there the ark, or the tent where the ark was, and therefore he would. This was a place where he would go, and it's interesting because in the morning we were learning about if you're in a place where you can actually see the mountain where the temple is, and here it mentions that he would go to the top of the Ad HaRosh, to the top of this mountain, and he would bow over there. And Rashi says because he was able to see the tent where the ark was, where the temple, where the tabernacle, where the ark was situated. And what happens there? And he sees before him is Hushai the Archite, and his tunic is torn and dirt upon his head. And David said to him, if you pass over with me, you will be a burden to me. Now, what does this mean, you'll be a burden to me? So the Metzudas David over here, one of the commentaries says he's old. It'll be hard for him to travel. And keep up. In other words, he's going to slow us down. If we need to run, it's not going to be safe. So that's one of the understandings of what he means. It's going to be a burden. But the other explanation is just too many people. How many people can he escape? Can he run with? So David is advising Hushai Hoarki to return. And here he says in verse 33, he says 34, but if you return to the city and say to Avshalom, I shall be your servant, O king. I have always been your father's servant. Now I'm your servant. You will be able to nullify Achitophel's counsel for me. And this is a brilliant advice that David is telling Hushai, that Hushai should be a double agent, pretend that he's going to be Avshalom's advisor, and really he's going to, the main point is that he will nullify Achitophel's advice. And that's actually what ends up happening later. But this Hushai Hoarki is a very close friend of David's. And as we see that he has tears his clothes, seeing that what David is going through, and he even puts earth on dirt on his head, also symbolic of mourning and trying to show the suffering that he feels because David is suffering and because the entire kingdom is on on a very fragile right now and possibly going to be destroyed. And so Hushai, who's a close friend of David, is feeling terrible about the situation. But David tells him, don't come with me, go back, and you're going to help me out. So David is trying to really get a lot of helpers, because he's already sent back the Kohanim, the Kohen Gadol, and their sons are going to be traveling back and forth, giving David information. He's got the Itai Hagiti back over there, and all the Gitites. So he's sending Hushai back as well, and Hushai is really the main guy who's going to be somehow nullifying Achitophel's advice. Now, the Gemara says something very strange over here. The Gemara says that David went, literally, the way we translated it was Ad Haroish, to the top of the mountain. And the commentaries say the top of Mount Olives, that he's basically going to this area to bow to Hashem. But the Gemara says he's actually going to worship an idol. Now that sounds shocking, that David HaMelech is going now to worship an idol. But it's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, and I'm going to pull it up here. Let me see if I can share screen. Okay, let's try it. Oh boy, just lost it. Here, if I share screen. So the Gemara says, Vayehi David ba ad haroish. This verse, it says David went to the top, which we translate as the top of Mount Olives, Asher yishtachav Hashem le'Elokim, that he's going to bow there to Elokim, which we understood to Hashem. The Gemara says, Ve'ein roish ala avodah zara. Roish means avodah zara. And so the beginning of this statement was Rav Yehuda Marav says David wanted la avodah zara. He wants to worship idols, and because Roish here, which we learned as the top, he refers to avodah zara because it has a verse in Daniel, the book of Daniel. It says V'hu Salma Reishe Didahav Tav, that it uses this term that it uses a verse that, for that image, its head was of fine gold. So the Gemara then continues and says, and behold, v'hinei lekrosai, behold, in front of him was Hushai Hoarki, karua kutantai, his garment was torn, V'adama al rosh, he had earth on his head. So in other words, Hushai was in like mourning, showing David that he really feels terrible. Amar Laila David. So he told Amar Laila David, he told David, you're going to worship an idol? They're going to say that a king like you worships idols. So Amar Lai, David said, Melech shekamaisi yahargenu benoi. People are going to say that a king like me, his son kills him. Is that better? That people will say that that the king like me, that his son kills him? Mutav yavayid avodah zara, better that I should worship an idol. V'yal yischalal shem shamayim b'far hesya, in the name of God, should not be desecrated in public when I get killed. So this is the Gemara. Now, what does that Gemara mean? It's a very shocking Gemara. Does it mean that David really wanted to worship an idol? So the understanding is that what David wanted to do was, David was very nervous that God's name is going to be desecrated because Avshalom, his son, is going to kill him. And what are people going to say? Where is God? It's going to be quite a bad, it'll be quite a bad pitch for Hashem. It'll be bad marketing for Hashem. Like, where is God? His anointed one, David, the righteous one, his own son goes and kills him. And so David is very nervous for Hashem's honor. He says, you know what? I have an idea. I'm going to worship an idol, not really worship it. I'm going to pretend to worship an idol. He's not going to actually worship it. He'll just pretend to worship the idol. In this way, people will say that his son killed him. He deserved it. He worshipped an idol. And it won't be a chilul Hashem if his son kills him. So David is more worried about God's honor than God himself is. God himself is, might be letting Avshalom kill David. But David's like, well, that's going to look terrible for Hashem. So David says, maybe it's worth it for me to worship this idol. At least in the outside, it's going to look like I'm worshiping an idol. And if I do that, when Avshalom, my son, kills me, at least people won't think bad about God. They'll think bad about me. So it'll be at least more respect for Hashem. So this is, to that extent, David was thinking maybe he'll do that in order to keep Hashem's image, in order to be able to keep up the reputation, Hashem's reputation. Now, what is the answer that Hushai Ho'arki gives? So the Gemara continues over there, and it mentions that Hushai Ho'arki tells David, he says, why did you marry her? Why did you marry his mother? She was a Ishes Yafas Tayar, a woman who you found at war. Why'd you marry her? And David says, it's permissible to marry Ishes Yafas Tayar. Look in the portion of Kiseitze. You're allowed to marry Ishes Yafas Tayar. What's wrong with that? So Hushai says, but you forgot to compare the chapters one to the next. You weren't doiresh smuchen. You didn't learn things that come next to each other in the Torah have a connection. You forgot to do that. If you would look at what's next to the laws of marrying a woman, a captive woman at war, what's next to that law? Next to that law is the law of a ben soirer umayra, is the law of a child who is a rebellious child. And you forgot that you have to connect the two, that if a person, it's permissible to marry a woman, a captive woman, you're allowed to in certain scenarios, in certain cases, true, but guess what happens afterwards? There are consequences. This is not going to be the most righteous child. This child is going to have flaws. He's going to be rebellious. And so people are going to say, Hushai tells David, he says, you shouldn't worship an idol and save God's reputation. Everyone knows that your son is because you married an Eshes Yafas Tayar. You married a captive woman who was not Jewish. You married her. Her child is a rebellious child. People are going to understand that. They know who his mother is. They know that you married this woman as a captive of war, and therefore your idea to worship, to look like you're worshiping an idol, is not exactly necessary. It's not necessary at all. It'll actually backfire on you that you worshipped an idol. And better people already know that this child is a rebellious child. So that was Hushai's answer, and therefore David did not end up pretending to worship an idol. But that's the Gemara. So it's an interesting thought. I think it's a very powerful idea how David was so concerned about the honor of Hashem that he was willing to ruin his entire reputation just because if he gets killed, it'll look bad for Hashem, and therefore he was willing to destroy everything that he built up and make it look like he's worshiping an idol. And there is another understanding of that Gemara, and that is that he was thinking of going outside of Israel, because it says if you live outside of the land of Israel, it's as if you're worshiping an idol. So he had a thought of leaving Israel, and that's one of the understandings of that Gemara. But anyway, the common understanding, as I explained it, and that's based on this verse here that it says Ad Harosh. And Hushai convinces him not to. So that's an alternative translation than the way we explained it originally, which is he was worshiping Hashem and davening to Hashem at this place. And as Rashi says, he was rugged. He had a habit of going. He had a custom of going to this area to daven to Hashem. Now we're up to verse 35. Verse 35, are not Tzadok and Avyasar the Kayanim there with you? So you have Tzadok and Avyasar. In other words, David is telling him, go return to Jerusalem. You'll have Tzadok and Avyasar there. And it will be that anything you hear from the king's house, you will tell to Tzadok and Avyasar the Kayanim. You'll tell them. This way you'll have inside information. You'll tell it to the Kayanim. Avshalom is not suspecting the Kayan Gadol, and really, but their two sons are really my agents. Behold, their two sons are there with them. Tzadok's Achimaz and Avyasar's Yonasan. And send me by their hand any word you may hear. So you can send through them anything that you find out. You'll be able to send me the info, and it will help me. Hopefully, it'll let us win this rebellion. It'll overcome the rebellion. So Hushai, David's friend, came to the city as Avshalom was about to enter Jerusalem. So he made it there just in time. So it didn't look like he was hanging out with David. Instead, he was there. He's from Yerushalayim. He never even went with David. That's what it looks like, because he came back to the city as Avshalom was about. Avshalom Yavo Yerushalayim, and Avshalom went to Yerushalayim, or decided to go. Rashi says he decided at that point to go to Yerushalayim. And now we're up to chapter 16. And chapter 16 begins with David meeting up with this person we heard from way back. His name was Siva. He was a someone who was connected to King Saul's family. He was like a servant there, and he's supposed to be helping out Mephibosheth, who was lame, and this is Mephibosheth's, so to speak, helper, Ziva. Now, Mephibosheth was the son of Yonasan. You have to keep in mind that David was a very close friend of Yonasan, and Mephibosheth is the son of David's very close friend Yonasan. Yonasan was the son of Saul, and he was the son who would stick up for David, if you remember. David had promised Mephibosheth safety. Mephibosheth was very nervous that, since Shaul was constantly killed David, so Mephibosheth was, of course, nervous. He was in hiding, and David took him out of hiding and promised him safety. And this Ziva was like this slave from Shaul's household who was going to sort of like look after him. So here we have this new chapter. David had just passed beyond the summit, and behold, Ziva, Mephibosheth's servant, was in front of him with a pair of donkeys laden with 200 breads, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 portions of dried figs, and a container of wine. The king asked Ziva, "Why do you have these things?" And Ziva answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride upon. The bread and the dried figs are for the youths to eat, and the wine is for the exhausted one in the desert to drink." And the king then said, "And where is Mephibosheth? You're supposed to be taking care of Mephibosheth." And Ziba said to the king, "Behold, he is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, today the house of Israel will restore my father's kingdom to me." And so we'll soon look into this more, of the story of what exactly is going on between the son of Yonasan, Mephibosheth, and Ziva, the person assigned to take care of him. What is the real story over here, and who are they joining? What are they thinking? What is exactly happening with this rebellion? What is the thoughts of Mephibosheth? But I'm going to hand over the microphone to Rabbi Wernick.